The distant planet, Calcor 7, had seen centuries of conflict, but the last few decades had brought an unprecedented lull. Dazzling orbital fleets encircled the planet, brimming with the latest energy-based arsenals, fusion cannons, plasma lances, and force field projectors that could instantaneously dismantle incoming threats. Governments, corporations, and roaming warlords all believed the future belonged solely to these fancy technologies, indifferent to the older, cruder method. Energy shields ringed every major city, every corporate campus, and nearly every settlement. They were so ubiquitous that most soldiers carried miniature personal shields, safeguarding each trooper from small-scale attacks. Nobody, from the highest generals to the rawest recruits, believed anything else could breach their defenses. Yet that complacency overlooked one detail. While modern energy fields excelled against energy weapons, their designers had blatantly dismissed simpler, more ancient methods of war. For years, rumors floated across the star lanes that in the backwater provinces of the galactic frontier, a handful of impoverished militias still used ballistic rifles, manual reloads, metal slugs propelled by chemical propellant. Military analysts scoffed. They saw such gear as hopelessly outdated and tactically irrelevant. In high-level briefings, they might half-joke about old ballistic contraptions, calling them museum pieces, or discussing them solely in historical contexts. This arrogance inevitably trickled down, and in time, nobody bothered to shield their new force fields against masses of fast-moving physical projectiles. To them, ballistic warfare was a fossil, a curiosity that had no place on the galaxy's expanding stage. And so, in the palaces and war rooms of Calcor 7, the notion that centuries-old rifles might pose a real threat was laughed off as an absurd flight of fancy. But that supposed backwardness was exactly what gave Commander Ilavan and his ragtag battalion their opening. They were veterans of conflicts on fringe world places where the dazzling might of sophisticated technology often flickered and died. They had rehearsed day after day with archaic slug rifles, carrying out training drills on broken tundras and dusty deserts, where energy-based weapons sometimes misfired in adverse conditions. Over time, their discipline and devotion to the old methods molded them into a deadly force. They were accustomed to the recoil that modern troops found shocking. Their ears were used to the crack of propellant that echoed across an entire battlefield. And, perhaps most importantly, their armor wasn't a shimmering barrier of plasma, but rugged home-forged plates with pockets that could carry real ammunition. Where many saw filth and drudgery, Eleven's battalion saw the advantage of reliability and stealth. Then came the outbreak of a localized rebellion on Calcor 7, sparked by the planet's new governor, Arctis Scythe. As part of an ambitious power grab, Governor Scythe forced the local population into working in fusion factories at meager wages, all to build an even more lavish defense system around the capital. Opponents formed an underground resistance, but each time they rose up, the city's advanced artillery hammered them down. Not a single shot from the rebels managed to pierce the all-encompassing energy shields around the capital. Morale was in tatters. The situation looked dire enough that certain rebellious factions, in desperation, reached out across starways to anyone who might offer a lifeline, a new tactic, something novel or unexpectedly effective. That was how Commander Ilvan and his battalion arrived on Calcor 7's outskirts, hidden in the cargo hold of a battered freighter. Their presence remained invisible to local authorities, who dismissed the unusual landing as a mere merchant ship or perhaps an asteroid miner's barge. Under cover of night, the battalion unloaded their weathered gear. They carried ballistic rifles with polished barrels, crates of heavy ammunition, and portable electromagnetic scramblers they had rigged together from old power cells. The local rebel leaders who met them looked skeptical. Many had grown up believing advanced lasers and plasma mortars were the ultimate apex of warfare. To see a company of warriors hefting slug throwers more primitive than anything they'd ever witnessed caused confusion and, for some, outright disbelief. Yet the rebellious command, short on options and out of time, chose to trust the newcomers' insistence that they knew how to punch through the city's defenses. Meanwhile, inside the capital's grand citadel, Governor Scythe gloated over the data from renewed rebel attacks. Each assault told the same story. Unstoppable energy barriers repelled lasers and plasma charges with ease. Among his circle of advisors, there was talk of a rumored infiltration by foreign forces, but nobody gave any weight to the idea of ballistic weapons. The city's military patrols wore advanced sensor suits that could instantly detect energy spikes from miles away. The moment rebels attempted to power up a planet-based artillery piece, they could be located and subdued. To the city's leadership, the war was practically already won. So they authorized a new wave of expansions, more towers, more shield generators, confident the capital would stand forever as an impregnable fortress. They never considered that something wholly unexpected might slip beneath their notice. Under bright starlight out in the desert, Commander Elevon's people set up a hidden command post. Engineers hammered rods into the rocky ground, hooking them up to a crude array of electromagnetic disruptors. The rebels watched, perplexed, as these devices hummed and crackled with a raw, unrefined noise. The day before the assault, Elevon called his officers together for a final briefing. Spreading a patchy map on a wooden table, he explained that the capital's giant energy shield possessed a fundamental blind spot. It was tuned against energy-based assaults, but it remained porous to mass-based projectiles if the shield's stabilizers were scrambled. Ilya's people had discovered that, under the right EM interference, the finely calibrated shield sensors would be overwhelmed and momentarily revert to a default field setting meant only to contain atmospheric conditions. In that vulnerable state, a barrage of physical slugs could pass through. The timing had to be perfect, mere seconds, but it would be enough. The plan hinged on splitting the old-school battalion into multiple squads. A scouting team would infiltrate the city's outskirts and disable a trio of smaller shield generators that kept watch over the perimeter. Another unit, guided by rebel insiders, would position the magnetic scrambler towers on the shield's perimeter. At the precise moment, these towers would emit a sudden pulse to distort the main shield. Then, from concealed vantage points, squads armed with ballistic rifles would open fire. Thousands of razor-sharp slugs would slice through the shield's compromised segments and rain upon unsuspecting defenders. Swift infiltration forces would follow, capturing or destroying vital command posts before the system could recalibrate. Despite the uncertain odds, the battalion believed in their method. Countless field experiments had shown that advanced shield systems relied too heavily on scanning for energy-based threats. Their watchers had blinded themselves to the centuries-old brutality of flying steel. On the night of the assault, the rebel infiltration group slipped in first. Disguised as supply carriers, they made their way through the heavily patrolled cargo gates. Their route took them into the industrial quarters where fusion reactor cores glowed behind thick glass barriers. There, the infiltration team quietly planted small explosive devices at the base of each perimeter shield node. At the designated hour, those explosives would create a carefully measured chain reaction to disrupt localized energy flows. Then the EM towers would go live, jamming the city's main detection systems. It was a dance of precise timing. Even the slightest delay could allow the defenders to adapt. Every participant's heart pounded with the knowledge that if one piece of the puzzle failed, all would be lost, and the battalion's archaic rifles would prove worthless against fully operational energy shields. At precisely midnight, the infiltration team triggered their bombs. Deep, resounding blasts shook the outskirts, momentarily dimming the shimmering sphere overhead. Alarms screamed across the capital as sirens blared and lights pulsed throughout guard towers. Reacting automatically, the city's sensor network tried to identify the cause, scanning the perimeter for the distinctive energy signature of plasma rifles or laser cannons. Finding none, the system flagged it as a technical malfunction. In that moment of confusion, the electromagnetic scramblers kicked on. A rumbling wave of distortion swallowed the horizon, short-circuiting the city's external sensor arrays. Caught between multiple disruptions, the shield's sophisticated AI fell back to its default atmospheric containment setting. That was what Commander Eli Vaughn and his shooters had waited for. From high ground near a craggy ridge, the battalion unleashed volley after volley of ballistic fire. The desert thundered with the sound of chemical propellants igniting. Dozens, then hundreds of gleaming slugs traveled in lethal arcs. Their speed far exceeded any archaic notion. While they lacked the luminous flare of plasma, they traveled so fast and in such dense clusters that guard stations simply had no time to respond. The slugs tore into watchtowers, shattered supply lines, and punched through unsuspecting squads of defenders whose personal energy shields never stood a chance against kinetic bombardment. Arc after arc of metal bullets passed right through the shimmering barrier that was now helplessly miscalibrated. Panic ensued within the capital. Commanders yelled into malfunctioning communications, struggling to realign the shield's frequency, but the advanced technology had no quick fix for the ballistic onslaught. Chaos spread as the infiltration forces moved in. Streets once devoid of war erupted, with the racket of ballistic rifles echoing against towering buildings. Ilvan's squads, disciplined and methodical, advanced with efficient brutality. They were used to reloading under duress, each movement practiced so many times that it felt second nature. Their stoic precision stunned the defenders, who were more accustomed to pressing a button on an energy weapon than managing the mechanical complexities of bullets. Meanwhile, rebel allies swarmed the fusion factories, driving out security teams still reeling in confusion. Local partisans, armed with newly distributed slug handguns, joined the push, emboldened by an assault that was actually breaking the capital's grip for the first time in years. Governor Scythe, outraged and incredulous, rushed to the command tower. Blinded by his own hubris, he demanded real-time updates, only to be informed that every sensor was flickering under the electromagnetic pollution. The staff tried feverishly to reset the shield. While tinkering with the system's core, they discovered that its intricate subroutines had never been programmed to handle illusions of mass-based attacks. The shield's early prototypes might have, but over centuries of cutting-edge innovations, the designers had gutted all unproductive layers that were no longer thought relevant. To resurrect those layers now required massive codes, patches, and reboots. There simply was no time. Already, enemy squads were converging on critical points of the city, cutting off power lines, disabling communications, and taking control block by block. The story about a worthless ballistic battalion was proving horrifyingly false. In a grim act of desperation, the governor's elites unleashed advanced mechs tall. Mechanical war suits armed with plasma blades and micro-laser turrets. Their thick armor could shrug off small energy blasts, and with an internal shielding layer, they were nearly impervious to conventional energy-based assaults. But ballistic rounds, launched in enormous volumes, took them by surprise. Though the first mech stormed forward, slicing at the rebels with their blazing swords, the battalion's snipers targeted vulnerable joints. Heavy-caliber bullets hammered at servos and pivot points. The mechs faltered, some exploding under a hail of tungsten core slugs. Where a laser might have struggled against reflective plating, the old-fashioned metal barrage had no trouble denting and piercing if it found the right angle. Slowly but surely the unstoppable mechs broke down, leaving behind smoldering husks in the streets. The final blow came at the heart of the city's fortress complex, a grand tower crowned with the capital's main shield generator. The infiltration squads, having neutralized the perimeter defenses, coordinated with ballistic support. As the large rotating generator spun overhead, emanating flickers of partial energy fields, the battalion set up a final, decisive assault. Several squads fired in timed bursts, shattering guard turrets and sensor dishes. In the chaos, a rebel demolition team raced up the interior corridors. Overriding security doors with code scramblers, they planted shaped charges around the generator's primary coupling. Governor Scythe attempted one last directive, ordering a full discharge to overload any hostiles in the tower, but before the system could ramp up, the shaped charges detonated. With a deafening thunder and shattering glass, the entire top portion of the tower collapsed, ending the shield for good. As the city's once dazzling dome flickered out, the reality of the situation settled on the defenders. Their advanced weaponry, so certain of success in pure energy confrontations, had been subverted by a tactic older than any of them remembered. All that remained was street-by-street fighting, and with ballistic rifles, the battalion dominated there too. No more protective barriers stood between them and victory. The mightiest real-time scanning equipment was jammed, the cutting-edged mechs lay in smoky ruins, and thousands of defenders surrendered to avoid annihilation. Fear rippled through the defenders' ranks, many of whom were stunned to see centuries-old technology etched onto the battle rifles that had shredded their unstoppable fortress. Sporadic clashes continued through the early morning. By dawn, the capital was in the hands of the rebels. In the main courtyard, near the remnants of the toppled shield tower, Commander Elevan and his officers stood guard over Governor Scythe, who knelt in defeat. Still stunned by how easily his empire of technology had crumbled, Scythe offered money, ships, and pardons if only they would grant him safe passage off-planet. His voice quivered as he demanded, with little conviction, to know why the battalion's old rifles had caused such carnage. Elevan answered simply, weapons evolve, but so do defenses, and eventually, defenses become complacent. Sheathing themselves entirely in energy turned them blind to a simpler threat. In the end, it wasn't just bullets that broke the city, but arrogance that opened the door. Word of Calcor 7's stunning fall spread quickly across neighboring systems. Everyone from mercenary commanders to entire fleets began re-evaluating their arsenal. Specialized engineers started examining ballistic designs, seeing how they might incorporate new modifications. Meanwhile, the novices, who had once laughed at the notion of slug throwers, scanned the battle logs in shock. The ballistic battalion departed Calcor 7 soon after, leaving the rebels to negotiate a new, hopefully fairer governance. Wherever Laban's force went, hushed whispers followed, praising them as the nightmare for any technology that believed itself unbeatable. Ultimately, the story resonated far beyond the planet. It reminded the entire sector that so-called low-tech solutions could, under cunning leadership, humble the greatest wonders of modern warfare. No shield was perfect, no fortress unbreachable, and sometimes the simplest punch landed the most devastating blow. In the months that followed, the rebel government began restoring the capital with less reliance on gargantuan energy walls and more emphasis on local policing and diplomacy. The manufacturing lines once dedicated to fancy shield tech were repurposed to produce solar panels, agricultural drones, and a moderate number of ballistic rifles for planetary defense. Governor Scythe was imprisoned and tried for his oppressive activities. Evidence of the city's prior arrogance was scattered in the wreckage of mechs and collapsed towers. On every street corner, bullet holes told a stark tale. The people of Calcor 7, having learned a harsh lesson about vulnerability, steered themselves toward a future that balanced technology with practicality. Beyond the scattered debris, Commander Elevan's battalion moved on to their next contract, fielding requests from colony after colony. It was a new era for them, once mocked as holdouts of a bygone era, now recognized as specialists who could exploit every blind spot advanced militaries refused to acknowledge. Their strategy was straightforward: look for arrogance, find the cracks in overconfident shielding, and then strike hard with unstoppable fury. More than one corporate prince or imperial general began losing sleep over tales of unstoppable bullets smashing through the best energy fields credits could buy. Some frantically sought new shield algorithms that might respond to mass-based threats. But in the labyrinthine swirl of bureaucracies and ever-evolving technologies, few patches could be tested in the real world. Far from the shining capitals of the galaxy, Elevan's unit carried their old rifles across desert worlds, frozen stations, and outlying asteroids. Each mission made them a bit more legendary and a bit more feared. The rumor was that they had tamed the fundamental laws of warfare, that no future weapon could make them obsolete. Indeed, their careful discipline, their mastery of suppression fire, and their cunning use of electromagnetic interference all worked in tandem. Where others saw only the glow and glamour of high tech, they recognized an Achilles' heel, and as more battles were fought, more stories drifted back, revering the simple truth. The oldest methods of violence remained, as cruel and as effective as ever, especially when wielded by those patient enough to adapt them to modern times. In the end, Calcor 7 stood as a living testament. The city that once boasted flawless energy shields had fallen swiftly under a storm of ballistic shells. Widespread laughter preceded the fight, but in the aftermath an uneasy silence replaced smug overconfidence. Soldiers around the galaxy whispered one to another, "Sometimes, everything that's old is new again when adaptability meets the battlefield." Though shield generators would evolve, and new lines of code might temporarily sway future outcomes, there would always be cunning warriors finding the next loophole. The outdated battalion, with rifles in hand, had proven that a fearless strategy can lay bare even the greatest illusions of invincibility, and that raw, low-tech brutality, guided by ingenuity, can still topple the mightiest of defenses.